Being here.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen.
And once again, for those who've just joined us, I am asking questions tonight on behalf of all of the MLive Media Group editorial board, many of whom are seated right here in the front row. I'm going to throw out my first question that I had planned because you made a big stir in here by walking in with Melissa Gilbert. What is that all about?
Great question, because I was going to give my friend Melissa Gilbert a shout out. Everyone, Melissa Gilbert. She's the founding member of Bonnet Heads for Schauer. But Melissa found me. This is a true story. Now, you probably know my story by now, but I was born and raised in Howell, not too far down the road. And Battle Creek has been my home for my adult life. But Melissa is a Michigander. She married Timothy Busfield, who is from Lansing, an MSU grad. Go Green. And so they were married. Timothy's from Michigan, and so they moved here. They moved to my hometown of Howell, and are committed to building the old opera house into a equity theater company. So they're investing here in Michigan and want to actually help build the film industry, build back the film industry. So Melissa called me. She was so mad about what our current governor is doing to this state. You stop me anytime I'm wrong, Melissa. She was so mad, and then she was looking up at there's got to be somebody running against him. And then she found out who I was, and then I'm from Howell. And she called, Timothy called me. And my staff, I'm overhearing this conversation in the other cubicle. I'm in my little office doing what the hard work that you don't always hear about the candidates do. And so I'm hearing this conversation, and it's like, this is a conversation I ought to be a part of. My staff hung up, and I said, who was that? It was Timothy Busfield. I'm a big West Wing fan, among other shows. And so I said, give me the number. So I dialed it back, and Melissa answered. So we met, developed a relationship, met in Howell, and here we are. She was with me today in Flint at our rally. She's going to be with me as much as possible, although she's got a new TV show she's working on in North Carolina because our current governor slashed our film and television industry tax credits, but we're going to change that together. But Melissa Gilbert is my friend and is here to support me today. Did I get that right? And she was two-term president of the Screen Actors Guild, was the vice president of the AFL-CIO. So she is a union leader, has always stood up for women, has always stood up for good wages for people, and fairness and equity for women, access to health care. Melissa Gilbert, my friend.
All right,
Michigan voter.
You may notice that many of us on the editorial board are women of a certain age, so we're going to have to really employ our journalistic integrity to not let that sway us tonight. All right. Okay, let's dive right into it.
Yes.
You have said that you would make education your top budget priority.
Yes.
How much more money than currently does the K-12 education system need, and where would that additional funding come from?
Yes. Well, the short answer is, I don't think any of us can answer that question. I've talked to a lot. I was in the legislature going back to 1997, elected in 1996. Proposal A was quite new at that point. What I do know is that education has not been the number one priority, the number one budget priority of our governor. It is true that in his first budget, he cut $930 million from public education, cut over $200 million from higher education. Our kids are in more crowded classrooms. The per pupil foundation grant is less than what it was when Rick Snyder became governor. $1 billion is spent on charter schools who are unregulated in Michigan, 80% of which are for-profit schools or for-profit companies. And it's not working. Whereas Ron from Bridge Magazine was just reading a report comparing Michigan to Massachusetts and how they really have made education their top budget priority in regulated charter schools. We've got a lot to do to fix our schools. My dad was a high school science teacher. My grandmother, a first grade teacher in public schools. I'm the proud product of public education. I was responsible for Head Start for 450 kids. What we have to do is put money back that was cut from our schools. We have to stop using the school aid fund for other purposes, as this governor did, to the tune of $400 million. That money should be put back. The school aid fund lost $600 million with the elimination of the Michigan business tax. You know, it's hurting our kids. So what we have to do, and I agree with our State Board of Education, is conduct an adequacy study. We really, instead of taking the money that's in the school aid fund, and keep in mind they've diverted it $400 million plus the $600 million that was lost in Michigan business tax revenue, we take the money that's there, divide it by the number of school-age kids, decide that's how much our schools get. I think we need to determine what it does cost, truly, to educate kids, including special needs kids. That's what Massachusetts did, and make this our #1 budget priority and make sure that we are funding our #1 priority. It is an economic imperative for us in Michigan, and it's morally the right thing to do for our kids. The key, and I learned this as a kid growing up, the key to a good job is a good education. That's why we must, and I will, as governor, make public education my #1 priority.
So during our editorial board interview with Governor Snyder on Monday, he actually called you a liar for saying that he has cut $1 billion from the education fund. I noticed you were much more direct in the different types of funding that actually was proposed to be cut, and actually all of it didn't come to pass. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that accusation, and then also to let the crowd know why you keep using that $1 billion number when it's been pretty roundly debunked.
Well, I came at it in two different ways. I mean, you know, Mitch Bean, former head of the House Fiscal Agency, has written about the fact that $600 million was taken away that used to go to the school aid fund from the Michigan business tax. I talked about the $400 million that's being used for community college and higher education, and I support them, but that's not what the school aid fund was for. I met with Lynn Jondahl not too long ago, one of my mentors, when I started out in the legislature, and he helped write Proposal A. And he said Proposal A was for pre-K through high school completion. So they've taken $1 billion of revenue right there. That's irrefutable. But, you know, where's our Kalamazoo Gazette reporter, Mickey? So, as an avid MLive reader, as I am, every morning it's app on my iPad and start my day with my first cup of coffee reading MLive to hear what's going on in all the communities around the state. But there was an article in March of 2011, and our current governor did a phoner, even though he was in Kalamazoo, did a phoner with the Gazette. Not sure you were the reporter, Mickey, or not, but said that these cuts to schools, and they mentioned the $900 million plus figure, said these cuts to schools would be difficult. Those are the words of our current governor to schools. These cuts would be difficult. And he's exactly right. But let me close with this. Don't take my word for it. You know, our current governor might be saying some different things if he actually spent time in schools. You know, when I toured Armada High School and shadowed a student for a day, and the students and the teachers told me that they don't have enough textbooks, that their computer technology is as old as some of the students. I met with a group of parents in East Grand Rapids. They are literally going door to door, raising money, using social media to raise money, and having bake sales to fund music, art, physical education, and foreign language for their students as a result of Rick Snyder's cuts. So I don't care if he calls me a liar, but I'll take issue if he's calling these teachers, these parents, these students that are living this every day a liar. He's wrong.
So you mentioned an adequacy study. Let's say, for example, you did an adequacy study and you managed to get that through, and it found that we really need $3,000 more per pupil in Michigan. Where would you propose that money comes from?
Well, I think that's a time to have a conversation with the public. You know, being a governor is about being a leader. It is about building a consensus. We've seen our current governor have a hard time. For example, he's been a cheerleader year after year on funding our roads. And even with a legislature of his own party, has really gotten nowhere. As governor, I will use my bully pulpit, if you will, the position of being governor to engage the public. I believe the public feels that education is our number one priority. And I am a grandparent. My oldest grandson is a first grader in Kalamazoo Public Schools. So this is very personal to me, and I think this is personal to the people of Michigan. But we need to have a bipartisan conversation with members of the legislature as well. I think Democrats and Republicans, they all say it in their campaign literature that education is their number one priority. Let's determine what it really does cost to educate kids. Now, conversely, part of where we get the money is I want to take the profit motive out of education in Michigan. You know, a non-MLive paper, the Detroit Free Press, did an 8-day series, which I thought was pretty good. And they determined that, of course, they acknowledge that most charter schools in Michigan are run by for-profit companies, but they not only take $1 billion of our tax dollars, and they are pretty much unregulated in this state, and we'll change that when I'm governor, but they spend $2,000 less per pupil in the classroom. They provide a different kind of education. Now, their performance isn't typically as good as our public schools. They spend $800 more per pupil on administration and overhead. So one of the things I want to do is if they're providing a K-3, K-6 education with no transportation, let's really figure out what that costs. We'll provide them that funding, and we'll see how interested they are in profiting off our kids. But you know, we have to build a consensus as a state. That's part of what being governor and being a leader is all about.
The cost of higher education has increased also to the point that it's becoming almost exclusive. What do you think the state government can do to bring down the cost of higher education for Michigan families?
Well, and again, as you know, from my time in the legislature and even talking to others that were there when I came in, the state used to provide about 75% of the cost of a higher education to our universities, and tuition made up about 25%. Now you can pretty much turn that on its head. So college is out of sight for most students. I mean, the reality is our current governor came in and cut higher education by 15%. Of course, we already talked about the cut in his first budget for our K-12 schools. Keep in mind that was all to pay for this $1.8 billion business tax cut we can talk about too. But what's the result of this is that tuition has increased every year during Rick Snyder's first term in office for college students. So what I'm going to do is make sure we provide more support for our universities. And again, this is not all going to happen overnight, but we gotta move in this direction to reverse the slide, provide more support. But then second, and I talk about this in my jobs plan, you can get it at markschauer.com/jobs plan, is I want to provide more need-based financial aid. You know, I worked my way through college, had a little help. My mom and dad helped me. I worked summer jobs, worked in college, got some scholarships, but we need to provide more need-based financial aid for students. And then third, I'm proposing a student loan refinancing authority to help students who are racking up debt refinance that student loan debt. Putting, you know, that hurts our economy when so much of their income is for paying off their student loan debt. I talked to one last thing, Jen, a student at Wayne State. She wants to be a teacher, by the way. She will be graduating with $32,000 in student loan debt. She's told me about her boyfriend. He's going to be a lawyer, and he's graduating with $100,000 in student loan debt. So this young couple that are starting out, she told me they are going to eventually get married, they've got $132,000 in student loan debt. That's wrong for them as they start out, but that hurts our economy, and that's why we've got to make the college affordable for anyone that wants to go.
When you talk about need-based financial aid, do you have a threshold in mind at this point?
I haven't determined that threshold. We'll look at the tuition grant program for private colleges and see how that works. That's a need-based program. There have been other models that were in place. The Michigan Promise Scholarship that we put in place when I was governor, we used some of the tobacco settlement money to do that. Number of other legislators have had very good ideas about providing support or student loan forgiveness for students that commit to careers in demand like healthcare and teaching or working in underserved communities or committing to stay in Michigan. I want to look at all the good ideas that Democratic and Republican members put in front of me. But let me just say one last thing. For Michigan to be a high-skill, high-wage, high-growth economy, we have to have the talented workforce. And that's why I'm so concerned about cuts to education and higher education being out of sight for young people. We have to have the talent to compete.
Okay, well, that last comment actually was a good segue. Let's talk about the economy for a little bit. You contend that Michigan is not the comeback state that Governor Snyder says it is. Yet job creation is up and unemployment is down. Explain your position.
Well, it's fascinating. I think my opponent has sort of explained it himself in his first television ads. I think the one coming out of the swimming pool with the snorkeling gear on, and proclaimed himself the comeback kid. And then after he figured out that was out of touch with what real people are experiencing, then said, "Well, wait, you don't feel it yet, but hire me for 4 more years, and then you will." He acknowledges that average Michiganders are not feeling any kind of economic comeback. I mean, his policies may be working for the wealthy and the well-connected, but aren't working for most Michiganders. Look, if you look at when he first came into office, Michigan's economy gained about 100,000 jobs. And that's when the auto industry was starting to come back. Now keep in mind, I was there in Congress when it counted, a tough time when the auto industry was about to go out of business. And I supported the grants and loans and even helped lobbied with some of the car companies to locate jobs. With General Motors, I urged them to move the Chevy Traverse from Spring Hill, Tennessee to Lansing. That's where I bought the car that I'm driving right now. It was in my congressional district. The point is, economy created about 100,000 jobs from the comeback of the auto rescue, and Michigan's economy has continued to lose steam every year since his $1.8 billion tax cut went into effect and right to work went into effect. Now, I don't think it's a comeback when we've got the 5th worst unemployment rate in the country. I don't think it's a comeback when we are one of the few states in the country that hasn't recovered all of the jobs lost in the Great Recession. Our nerd accountant, bean counter governor, dashboard governor wants to be graded on a curve. And I don't think the people of Michigan should do that. The last month, the Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor reported state-by-state job loss. Michigan lost 9,500 jobs, the most of any state in the country. We're projected to be 49th out of 50 in job growth. So Rick Snyder's economy may be coming back for some, but it's not coming back for the rest of Michiganders, and that's why we need a change.
How specifically will you remedy the unemployment rate in Michigan?
Well, I've laid out a detailed plan. I'll talk about some of the components tonight. I mean, first, we've got to make education our top priority. The states that have faster growing economies, lower unemployment rates, higher median incomes are those that have invested in their workforce. So that's number one. That's K-12, it's training and retraining. That's why, right to work is bad for Michigan, because labor unions that invest in their own apprenticeship and training programs, that's no cost to taxpayers, help create a strong workforce. And it's about higher education. Second is, it's very different from what our current governor has done. I'll cut taxes for middle class and working families that saw their taxes raised by our current governor. And I will put an end to the Snyder job-killing pension tax. I mean, I talked to a senior today that said, she was a retired teacher in Detroit. And she said, I'm so mad about my pension being taxed, I'm going to move out of Michigan. And, that is the story. And so what I will do is cut taxes for people who are living paycheck to paycheck and pension check to pension check. What happened is he took money out of the pockets of people that spend it in local businesses that hire local workers. The third thing I'm going to do is, just as I've always done in my entire career, whether it was for small tool and die companies or Brembo Brakes and Homer or Kellogg and Battle Creek or General Motors and Chrysler, is I'm going to support tax incentives that help businesses create jobs here in Michigan. We're going to put back, or we're going to retool and expand the film and television industry credits, but we're going to support businesses that create jobs here. If they send jobs overseas, we're going to make sure they repay that to taxpayers. We're going to invest in our cities. Our cities are hubs of economic growth. We're going to stop discriminating against people based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. I noted that my opponent still can't take a position on that issue, and that is a talent issue, and it's an issue for the vitality of our communities. As the governor of Michigan, I will be the Great Lakes governor. We will protect our natural resources and leverage them by being a leader in addressing climate change, and by I know you're supposed to wait. Hold on. But by being a leader in addressing climate change, but raising the bar on creating energy from renewable sources, and we're going to fix our infrastructure. Because we're 50 out of 50 per capita in spending on our infrastructure. It is the best jobs program there is. Those things are just a start, and I invite you to read more in my jobs plan.
Okay, you mentioned several tax cuts. Obviously, to balance that out, taxes are going to have to go up somewhere.
Well, I think the first thing we got to do is cut out all this waste and abuse within our current governor's administration. I mean, I'm going to get rid of his $41 million sweetheart furniture contract to his cousin George for furniture the state doesn't even need. We're going to stop giving tax breaks for companies that don't create jobs. We're going to end tax breaks for oil and gas companies for exploration in Michigan. I'm going to end this Aramark prison food service contract, which is scandalous and going to cost the state tens of millions of dollars. I mean, they were fined $160 million through the state Medicaid program. You know, we need to have an efficient state government with integrity, and we're going to take all of those, and I'm going to listen to state employees as well. I've heard incredible ideas already from state employees that want to serve the people of Michigan and see waste within their own departments. We're going to dedicate all of that to our priorities, and those are education, that's tax fairness, it's rebuilding our infrastructure. That's where we start.
Okay, a couple of answers ago, you referenced right to work. And I believe that you have said elsewhere that you vowed to fight right to work and fight
Absolutely.
to repeal it. My question is, why is this worth spending the time to revisit? What tangible ways can you explain that right to work has actually hurt the state?
Well, I think you can ask the question either way. I mean, our current governor was right when he said right to work would be divisive for Michigan, and was not on his agenda. And what was interesting, MEDC had Mike Finney spoke before the Detroit Economic Club just days after right to work for less was signed into law, and said, "What's your economic analysis on this?" He said, "Well, we didn't do one." He said he wasn't going to do it. The point is, if they would have bothered to have read the economic analysis, they would have seen that states that have enacted right to work for less laws have seen wages go down for all workers, not just union workers. I talked about the contributions a labor movement makes in training a skilled workforce, whether it's to build buildings or our infrastructure or to build cars and advanced technology in Michigan. Point is, I'm going to look at every policy through the lens of what does it do to create an economy that works for everyone? What is it going to do to help create a stronger middle class? Let's be clear. Right to work for less was a political attack. It was not about creating jobs. It was not about the economy. It was a political attack. And I think it was a defining moment for the electorate in terms of how they viewed this governor who promised one thing in 2010 and has delivered something very different. But, you know, on my watch, I will wake up every day fighting to make sure we build a strong middle class and have jobs that pay and help drive our economy. And right to work for less runs counter to that. He can't point to a single job that's been created as a result of Right to Work. You can't point to a single company that's come here as a result of Right to Work.
So you've talked about replacing the emergency manager system with financial transition teams, is what you call them.
Yeah.
However, it's not clear what sort of authority those teams would have to make the politically hard choices that local elected officials in these struggling cities have resisted. So can you please explain how your system would work?
Right. Well, what we actually need in this state is a real urban policy. We don't have one. What has happened on our, just like Proposal A needs to be re-examined, that's part of what an adequacy study helps us do. We've got to review municipal finance in Michigan. I mean, it's not working. What our current governor has done is dramatically cut revenue sharing to municipalities, and when they get into financial stress is fight fires, and he sends in unelected emergency managers with total authority and accountability only back to the governor. I read a series, again, Ron, I think this was in Bridge Magazine, about a series of interviews and conversations with those under the former law, under the current law, elected officials, and one of their findings is that you get better outcomes when you actually have a real partnership and you have a proactive strategy. So first, we need to have an urban policy. We need to understand the value of cities to drive innovation and growth and draw talent and innovation to Michigan. But if communities find themselves in distress, we have to have an early warning system, and then the state, under the leadership of the governor, has to provide some tools. You know, the state has a revenue estimating process, so the state stays on track. If there's bad news, then the state needs to, reduce expenditures and find a way to balance the budget. That's expertise that most municipalities don't have. The state can provide those tools and service and capacity, but, but there has to be accountability, clearly. If local officials don't stay within those revenue estimates with their budget, there has to be additional support, and there has to be accountability at the end of the day. But fundamentally, I do believe in democracy. I believe that locally elected officials should run their communities, but the state has got to be much proactive, and I will be personally supportive as governor in helping to support our local communities that are engines for job creation.
All right, let's talk for a minute about a topic that's probably near and dear to everybody here, roads. Assuming that the state's roads must be fixed in order for Michigan to be economically viable, what bold action would you take as governor to make that happen regardless of politics?
Well, I'm going to do more than cheerlead about it. And I was there the last time the legislature did something significant to fix our roads. I was a freshman. Now, keep in mind, what you need to know about me, I've always represented Republican districts. I'm a Democrat. I beat the Republican incumbent in 1996. No one thought I had a chance. Came in here, and one of the first items on John Engler's agenda was to fix our roads. And he learned my name pretty quickly and invited me into his office, talk about this is something that needed to be done. We developed a bipartisan plan. I voted for it. And what we need to do is, as a governor, I'll provide leadership with the legislature. I'm not going to wait until January 1 when I'm sworn in. I'm going to start working right after the election, pulling together Democratic members, Republican members of the legislature, key interested parties to look at all of the ideas that folks want to bring forward. Now, the first thing, as a former member of Congress, I served on the Transportation Committee. I also helped bring $850 million back to Michigan. By the way, that picture that the governor has on his road to recovery, his town hall meetings, that's one that was fixed with money I helped bring to Michigan, part of that $850 million. So I know how to do it. But really it is, so what we're going to do is get our fair share from Washington. I know we are a donor state. I'm going to work with the president, with his administration, with our congressional delegation to get our fair share. Second, I already talked about, the waste and abuse in state government, I'm going to audit every department of state government. And all of the savings we're going to put toward our priorities, one of those is roads. Third, if we still need more money, then we're we're not going to balance it on the backs of the people who have already had their taxes raised by Rick Snyder. He squandered a perfect opportunity. His number one priority was a $1.8 billion corporate tax cut. And to pay for it, he cut our schools and raised taxes on retirees and seniors and on working families and low-wage earners. They have already paid. So before they get asked to do anything more, we've got to make sure that the business community that benefits from roads too. You know, they've spent a lot of time or a lot of money on billboards and lobbying and everything else. We've got to have everybody at the table. You know, when push was coming to shove early in the summer on the legislature, and I was talking to members of the legislature, Democrats and Republicans were working together on this. They were trying to get it done. In the Republican-controlled Senate, they refused to have heavy trucks pay their fair share. We have the heaviest truck weights here in Michigan, and they were exempted from being part of the solution. This governor refused to even ask businesses to be a part of that solution in providing the dollars that we would need to fix our roads that they would benefit from too. They spend more when axles on their trucks break or their tires blow out too. And the final thing I want to say about leadership and how I will convene, and my experience as a former member of the legislature and knowing how members of the legislature work, having always worked in a bipartisan way, when it was crunch time, this governor was in Manhattan at a fundraiser with Michael Bloomberg, and I think we can see why. He's now spending $2 million on behalf of our governor. So I will be there, I will have my sleeves rolled up, and I will work to forge a bipartisan solution in fixing our roads and our bridges and our underground infrastructure, which we need, is the best short-term jobs program there is. It will help move our economy forward.
Okay, we have time for just maybe 2 more questions if we can get through them in a minute each.
All right.
What is the most pressing social issue facing Michigan right now, and what will you do about it?
It's jobs and income and opportunity. I mean, we see, it's kind of interesting. I was talking to a gentleman earlier about, our governor's economic philosophy. It really is the same old tried and failed trickle-down economics. It just widens income disparity. Some are doing very well in Michigan at the expense of most everyone else. So I think we've got to create more jobs that pay and then that can support families. I was in Detroit yesterday talking about challenges that our schools are facing. Structural poverty is a key reason why our kids are not coming to school ready, why neighborhoods aren't safe. So we've got to create an economy. This is what my campaign is about. It's creating an economy that works for everyone, not just for the wealthy and the well-connected.
And finally, and briefly, if you could sign one new law tomorrow, what would it be?
Fixing our schools is going to take a little bit. I would say the first one, I think the easiest one that I can quickly get to my desk is repealing the Snyder job-killing pension tax. That will be the easiest one because there are Republican candidates for the legislature that are campaigning on repealing the Snyder pension tax. So I expect that'll be the first one to get to my desk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Don't forget to vote. That's it.